Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Blessings podcast. Today, I am so happy to have Sun Yi with me. Sun is a master of out of the box thinking. He has a way of seeing things with a fresh perspective, and he's famous for making people say, I never thought of it that way. He's the founder of Night Owl, a creative agency and website design firm that boasts the creation of websites for famous personalities like Mel Robbins, Jay Shetty, and Gabby Bernstein, just to name a few. He also founded an amazing community called Night Owl Nation, of which I am a proud part, and I have to say it's made a huge impact in my life. It focuses on using storytelling to enhance your personal and professional growth and identity. And his hit podcast is called Authentic as FU, which kind of says it all. He is the king of over-delivering, demonstrating nothing less than excellence in every facet of his business. I don't know when or if he sleeps. Maybe he'll tell us. And he is big on passion and serving the greater good and pours his whole heart into everything he does. He's also no bullshit, which is why I like him. And he's not afraid to call it as he sees it, because who really needs drama these days anyway? And here is the authentic AF, Sun Yi. Welcome, Sun.
Thank you for having me, Mitzi. How are you?
I'm great. I'm having a fantastic day. I hope everybody is. And I can't wait to dig in and find out how you got to where you are, because you're just doing incredible
Me too.
things. Maybe we can figure it out together. You have shared a really interesting beginning of a story online that I want to start out with. You
Sure.
said that your father was days away from being born in North Korea. And
Yeah, my
so,
father was born 5 days after the Korean War started,
unbelievable.
which is June 25th, 1950.
So your father moved from North Korea. Now your mother, was she already in South Korea?
Yeah, my mom grew up in South Korea. So obviously I wasn't there, but
Yeah.
that I always hear the story like from my grandma. Like my grandfather was. This is before the war, so there was no such thing as North and South Korea. There was no DMZ.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It was all
So
just Korea.
yeah. But my grandparents from my dad's side, they lived on the north side. And when the war broke out, like everybody started moving south. So they were part of that migration. And my grandmother was pregnant with my dad and literally gave birth right after 5 days after it started. And then my dad met. The story of how they met is my mom is actually from the countryside. My dad grew up in Seoul. So in Korea, that's like a big thing. Like at least back then, like there was people who live in Seoul, and then there was people that live in the countryside. And my mom grew up in the countryside, and she moved to Seoul. And I think what happened was my dad was supposed to be set up on a blind date with somebody, but
Mhm.
that person couldn't make it and asked my mom to go instead. And then she met, and then that's how they met.
I love that story. My parents met on a blind date,
Oh, really?
interestingly. Yes. So then they migrated south, and then they drew this arbitrary line between North and South Korea, and your parents happened to be on the right side of it, ultimately.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could have been introduced into a whole different life.
Oh, yeah. I actually think about that a lot. If I was born in North Korea, obviously my life would have been completely different, like night and day different. And I think if I didn't, my parents didn't make the decision to move because we moved to the US when I was 11. And so if they didn't make the decision to move to the US when I was 11, then my life would have been completely different too.
That would really influence me if I had that kind of a history. Like that there were
Mm.
things that were huge catalyst moments that could have made your life story look entirely different. Does that weigh on you?
No, not really. I guess I think about it from time to time. The North Korea thing, I think about it just whenever I'm like feeling like shit. Sorry. Whenever I'm feeling like something's not going my way or something like that, like I'm just grateful that I wasn't born in North Korea. The, moving to the US, what I think about is I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I grew up in South Korea. because back then when we moved here because of the opportunity, but now South Korea is they're doing so well that, but I'm actually, I, I actually think that if I grew up in South Korea is a very homogenous country, right? So it's not like the US is very diverse. So there's diversity of not just like ethnicity and culture, but also diversity of thinking. As in, when you grow up in a country like South Korea, most people pretty much think the same.
Interesting.
So yeah,
So there's a homogeneity of everything, culture,
yeah.
thought, the way people
Like
look,
if
the way
something's
people think, the
popular,
way.
yeah.
Okay.
Like pop music is like here. I feel like there's different subcultures, like people who are like skaters, or people who listen to like indie music versus rock versus hip hop or whatever it is. In Korea, everybody just listens to whatever is popular. You know what I mean?
So there's a lot of conformity.
Hmm.
Interesting. All right. And I just want to get this out of the way. I didn't want to swear in the intro, but I do want to be authentic. So from now on, we can swear.
Okay, I
Okay with
probably
you?
won't, but
Okay. I'm
it
just
might slip
putting
out
it
once
out
in a
there.
while.
If you want to be authentic, it's okay. When you came to the US, you were 11. All right. Do you have any memories before you came here? What are your early
Oh
memories of
yeah,
childhood?
a lot.
What's your earliest memory? The first thing you can remember in your life?
Like I'm always find it fascinating when people remember when they were like 2 or 3 years old. I don't have any memory of that, but one of the earliest memories I can think of, I guess, is I think when I was like 6, we moved to a bigger apartment. So moving to that in the same, pretty much in the walking distance, but a bigger apartment. And I remember like moving to the bigger apartment, and I was like, "Whoa, wow!" I mean, I don't know much, but I was like, "Oh, this is nice," something like that.
Did you have your own room?
Yeah, when I was in Korea, I had my own room.
You did.
When we first moved to the US, though, I didn't have my own room. I shared my room with my sister. And just the other day, my sister was telling me how when I was in high school, because like now that we're in high school, like I couldn't really share my room with my sister. So they gave the room to my sister, and I slept in the living room. Like they put a bed out in the living room, and I slept in the living room. And my sister was saying about how, oh, like, you slept in the living room and you didn't complain once, or because I back then I didn't even think about that. I was like, I didn't even think, oh, that didn't even cross my mind.
You didn't think about it. You didn't have your own space in the.
One thing that now that I'm talking about this, what I remember is I feel like right now I'm so entitled. Like right now, if let's say I was a teenager and my mom was like, I can't have my room, I'll be complaining to my parents about it probably. But growing up, I guess I was a really good kid. I guess I was like a very grateful and good kid because there's so many things that I didn't get when I was young, but I never once felt like complaining or anything about it. Yeah.
What didn't you get that you wanted?
My parents never bought us any toys, or I didn't have any video games growing up or anything like that. Or
What did you do in your free time when you were little?
when I was young, I guess even now I'm like that, but I get really into something and I get bored of it after a little bit, like after a few months. So there was like a period of time when I was like really into K-pop. There was a period of time when I was really into drawing. There was a period of time when I was really into riding my bicycle. I guess all different kind of stuff, whatever was trendy at the time. I think I was a very trend follower, actually. I'm not like people might feel like, son, you're such like a trendsetter, but
Yeah.
I think I was like a very trend follower.
When you were young.
Yeah.
And since you didn't have a lot of toys or like physical objects to play with, it sounds like you had a creative mind. You created other things to do.
One thing I remember is like my mom said that I would break everything in the house because like I would always like pick apart like a radio to see what's inside, or so I always break things,
Well,
and
you
I
were
don't know how to.
turning things into toys. You were like
Yeah,
trying to find objects to explore.
yeah, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
What did you take apart and break in the
Like a
house?
lot of mostly electronics, like with a screwdriver. So I
Put
would,
them back together?
yeah, so I would try to put them back together, and then when I did, it wouldn't work.
Did you do it to the TV or?
No, nothing big like that.
Okay.
I think the one thing I remember is like a radio, like a Walkman kind of
Yep.
thing, like cassette tape, like cassette rewinder, things like that.
And they just never worked again.
Yeah. Some of them did, some of them
Okay.
didn't.
Okay. It was just a
Yeah.
hit or miss.
Yeah.
I love that. That to me is creativity. So when you were in Korea, did you go to school there? Obviously you
Yeah.
did. Yep.
So I went to elementary school in Korea till 5th grade, and then when I came here, I went into 6th grade. So I
And
started in the US in 6th grade.
okay. And what was the difference in that you felt most in school?
When you're young, like, you don't really notice those things. Like, now, if I were to move to a whole new country, I would be so scared. Like,
Mm.
it's like whole new language and all of that. But I remember back then, I wasn't scared at all. I wasn't scared that like I go into school and I literally don't speak the language. I was actually excited. But one thing I remember is I think when I was 6th grade on, I started seeing myself as I don't think I ever had confidence issues like when I lived in Korea
Mhm.
because I'm Korean and I speak Korean and I never had any. But then I think when I came here, that's when I started getting bullied
Mhm.
because not bullied like in a bad way, but kids are mean. So they like, and I was like one of three like Asians in my school. No,
Did you
like
move to? What was the part of the country that you moved to?
it was in LA. It was in Torrance.
Okay.
It was in LA, but this was like in 1990. And in the town that I lived in, at least, there wasn't a lot of Asians. It was like it's called Torrance. But then, like throughout my high school, that's when all the Asians started moving in. So, like by the time I left, there was like 30 Asian kids in my school.
Did you feel better then? Like, how did that affect you being the one of only three people of your culture?
It's so weird. Like when you're Asian in America, you pretty much only hang out with especially if you're Korean, you pretty much only hang out with other Koreans. I don't know. It's people say that here that there's this like pockets of like culture, like the people there's Chinatown and there's people only where Irish people live and things like that. And like they try to make it like so diverse and like this melting pot. But I don't think people like that. I think people naturally tend to be drawn to like others that are like them.
Yeah.
And I noticed that all throughout my life. Like a lot of Asians only want to hang out with other Asians. So
Yeah.
they actually don't prefer to mix with I guess they feel because like for example, Asian people take off their shoes when they go in the house. That's like a huge cultural shift that I saw. Like when I go to my friends who's not Asian, when I go to their house, that they keep their shoes on. I'm like, what the fuck? Or something like that. Yeah. Those kind of
That's
things.
funny. I grew up taking off my shoes. Everyone in my family takes off our shoes in the house.
Oh, really?
So I felt the same way about people who keep their shoes on in the house because it feels dirty if you're tracking all
Yeah.
that
Like how,
dirt
like you
around the
going on
whole
your
house.
bed with your, like, yeah.
Exactly. It bothers me. I'll ask people if they do that when they come over. I'll be like, "Do you want to take off your shoes?" It's
Yeah. And
okay.
they find that weird, right? Like
Sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah.
when
Some
they
people
take it.
do.
Yeah.
To me, it's a comfort thing. It's like saying, "I want you to be comfortable in my home."
But I feel like a lot of Americans actually feel more comfortable with their shoes on. If you tell them to take off their shoes off, they actually feel more uncomfortable, I think.
I think a lot of them do. You're right. I'm gonna think about that. I'm gonna notice that from now on. When I walk in the door, I take off my shoes. It's the first thing I
Mhm.
remove. I don't wanna have my shoes on in the house. I wanna feel the floor
Are
and
are
feel
you
comfortable.
Jewish?
No,
Okay.
no.
I had a Jewish girlfriend who also took off her shoes when she goes in the house. So I was like, "Oh, you took off
Yeah.
your shoes too?"
I'm English and Irish. A
One thing I
wasp.
noticed is, like, a lot of Jewish people and Koreans get along. Like, Asians and Jewish people get along. I think maybe they share similar in culture or
Mhm.
something.
I gravitate towards those cultures myself. My
Mm,
ex-husband is Jewish, and
yeah.
also I am very drawn to Eastern culture. Like I do a lot of
Oh,
things. Yeah, I do a lot of things like yoga and different like spiritual practices that are much more Eastern. So
oh, okay.
I feel like certain people gravitate toward that. Maybe that's one of those
Yeah.
things. And it's not cultural for me at all. I just developed that on my own.
Oh, so you're the only one in your family
No,
who's
my
like
whole
that.
family takes off their shoes, but I'm definitely the most woo-woo of my
Oh,
family.
okay.
No one else is woo-woo at
Well,
all.
the funny thing is Asian people these days are not woo-woo though. It's just the ancient, like, Eastern philosophy and all of that. But if you go to Korea right now, like, they're the farthest from these days.
Really? But don't
Yeah.
they still practice things like holistic medicine and different spiritual
I guess
beliefs?
they do because it's part of the history. So if you go to Korea, there's a lot of acupuncture and those, like,
Yeah.
herbal medicine places and
Right.
things like that. Like, kids don't care about, like, I remember my parents trying to make me drink that herbal medicine, like, when I was young. Every year, they'll spend a lot of money, and then I hate drinking. It's like what I noticed is I saw this YouTube video where this guy, he goes to all these different subcultures in America, like really cultural neighborhoods, and he spends like a week with them, like in the community, like with Amish people. And one of them was like a Muslim community in Minnesota. And they were talking about how this girl, she was in high school and she went to Turkey and where it's like a Muslim country, right? And then when she went there at the time when they're supposed to pray, like she was like about to pray, and the kids there were like, "What are you doing?" And it's people that are like in the culture, that grew up in the culture, they don't appreciate it as much. So they're like, they actually like in Korea, like you have to force your kids to eat kimchi, or you have to force your kids to do those kind of things. Where here, I feel like they're more like nobody in Korea likes wearing those like Korean outfits, but here, I think they're
That's
more
so
fascinated
funny.
by it.
That's making me think everything here that we celebrate as being at this high level of spirituality and people who are actually in that culture probably don't
Yeah.
even care
No,
about
yeah,
it.
exactly. It's like that, and it goes the other way too, where here, like eating pizza and like Western food is like so boring, right? Which but in Korea, like those are considered like the exotic. That's what
The
kids wanna
delicacy.
eat. Yeah.
That really opens up your perspective when you think of it like that. See, you're doing it already. I never thought of it that way. Honestly, it opens your mind. And that's what you do in your community because everybody in the community is extremely diverse. I've never been a part of a more diverse community. There are people from all over the world, literally, in the community. And it's really eye opening. It's so
Uh,
cool.
I think
So,
one of the reasons why is the pricing, because
oh, yeah.
one of the things that I noticed is like when I look, because when I went to Egypt, because the other day I looked up because we were changing our prices, so I wanted to keep it a certain price for certain countries, and I looked at the average household income, and like we have a lot of members from India, Nigeria, and Colombia. These three countries. For some reason, we have a lot of people from there, and I looked at Egypt too, and those countries, their average household income is 20 times less than so US was average almost 6,000 a month household income. In those countries was like 200 a month. So I was like, so $5 a month to them is a significant, it's an equivalent of like $100 a month to us. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So given that, you look at most memberships that are like $30, $40 a month, like minimum, some of them like $100 a month. That's half their salary, right? That's half their
Hmm.
household income. Or like
Hmm.
if you look at a $2,000 course, that's a 10-month salary for them. Do you understand? So there's
Yeah.
no, for some of these people, our community is like the first of its kind that they've never been in. You know?
Absolutely. That's really an interesting way of thinking about it. But then on the flip side, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, like in the United States, if you are doing that to make a living,
Yeah.
and I know you have other ways that you're
Yeah.
making a
Yeah.
living,
Yeah.
but if you're doing that to make a living, your expenses on this side are really
Yeah.
high.
Yeah.
So
So like
not
that whole,
charging. Yeah.
I knew this was going to happen because what's happening right now is globalization is causing flattening of that. Like in those countries, like for example, standard of living in China has gone up a lot in the past like 30 years, right? But then what's going to happen is those things has to flatten out as we become more and more globalized. And the ones it's going to affect the most are actually us because
Probably.
now you can hire freelancers like overseas instead of paying, let's say, $100,000 a year. You can pay like $20,000 a year and get the same level of talent. You know what I mean? So I feel like as that happens, it's gonna cause a lot of, like, disruption of,
Mm.
like, salaries here versus,
There
um
probably will be a shift. It's interesting because there's so much residual effect of that. Everything
Mhm.
about this country is so expensive.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's gonna go,
Well, it's
you
gonna
know?
become more expensive because the right now, it's actually cheap because most of the stuff we buy are manufactured overseas. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So as
Right.
their economy goes up, things are gonna start costing more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It will be so interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
And I love the way you think about it. You always say you have an analytical mind. So the way that you could dig into that is so interesting. So let's just go back a little bit. Like when you started to get a little bit older here in the US, is that when that kicks in, your whole tendency to be very analytical?
No, I think I've always had it.
You've always
Like,
had it.
I don't know if every kid does this, but yeah, I would overthink everything even when I was young, and I always actually hated that about myself.
Really?
Yeah,
For
because
example, can you think of a story about that?
when I was young and I would hang out with kids,
Mhm.
friends, I always thought that, like, to all the coolest kids, they don't overthink anything, right? They're
Mm.
kinda, you say it's actually to not care is how you become cool, right? This, "Oh, you did that? Oh, I don't even remember." That's kinda how what it m so I almost had to, like, I pretended to be stupid for most of my early life, even all the way up until 20s, I think, because I hated that about myself. I hated that I'm overthinking everything, like, when the cool kids don't notice anything, I'll be like, "Hey, did you notice that this person did this and blah, 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 blah?" And they're like, What? What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? I'm
I
a
know what you mean.
weirdo for doing that.
Oh, I can relate. I'm exactly the same way. But I wonder, does that also mean you're intellectually analytical and also are you like sensitive emotionally too?
Yeah, I was actually talking to Elena. She's like one of the small group leaders. I was talking to her about this, and I think it comes from like my high neuroticism. If somebody puts down a cup like on the table without a coaster, right? I would notice those things, and I think when you when you notice so much, it's because I worry so much that I'm always thinking like 3 steps. Oh, if you do this, then this is gonna happen, and then this is gonna happen. So I try to prevent it before that happens. Like I
Hmm.
worry so much that I start worrying for other people that stuff that they don't see. Do you know what I mean? Something like
Yes.
yeah.
So you always want to help everyone. That kind of feeds into
Yeah,
your desire to want to help
yeah.
everyone
I feel like I'm trying to help people
who
on
don't know
areas
they
that they
need
don't
help.
even know. Yeah, exactly.
You are, but there's a lot of really good vibes in that. Oh my gosh. So what was high school like for you?
By the time I got into high school, there were more Asian kids.
Okay.
So I moved towns when I was from middle school to high school in the same town, but basically a 10-minute drive away. So I went to a different high school from my middle school. We call them middle school in LA,
Yeah.
but
We call them that
when
in Pennsylvania too.
oh
We
really?
have
In
elementary
New York we
schools,
call it
middle school, and high school.
okay. In New York they call it junior high.
We
I
have
guess it
junior
may not
high too.
they call it maybe they do call it middle school.
Depends on
I
the
don't
school district, I think, but
yeah. So when I went to high school, there were actually more Asian kids. So there were about like 20 Asian kids. So I only hung out with Asian kids. But yeah, I think I carried that the whole like I'm not cool enough, I'm weirdo type of vibe. I think I ever since sixth grade, like ever since I moved to the US, I carry that because people always make fun of me for my English and things like that. So I carried that even when I got it wasn't until like I didn't realize that I was normal, that I wasn't actually like a weirdo. I would say until I was like in my mid to late 20s.
wow.
I
So
always
you
thought of
carried that
myself as a loser.
identity
Yeah,
as a loser. I
yeah,
think being a weirdo is different
sure.
from being a loser. I would definitely have said I was weird in high school and elementary school more because I think when people are more creative and march to their own beat, that is perceived as weird.
Yeah. And I guess I equated that to being a loser for some reason. And I remember like I try so hard throughout all my life, all the way up until like my 20s, to just to conform.
To blend in.
Yeah, to be mainstream. I just wanted to be mainstream. Like now is everybody loves, like they think it's cool to listen to indie music and they to be alternative and all of that. Back then I wanted to be like I wanted to listen to pop music. I wanted to be more mainstream. I wanted to be more like Kardashians or whatever, like whatever the mainstream pop
The
culture was.
popular thing,
Yeah.
right?
I wanted to be that. And I tried to be that my whole life because I felt like I wasn't, right? So I think I try so hard to be like the mean girls, right? Like the as closest to the popular group as possible, as much as possible.
Do you think that was some sort of innate cultural thing? Because in South Korea, that's how
But
it
yeah,
is.
I think it is. I
Okay.
actually think it is because almost every Korean people I meet are like that. Like even now. In Korea, if something becomes a trend, let's say like a Coach bag is a trend, then everybody has to get a Coach bag. Like in Korea, everybody's trying to buy a nice car. So it's very different than I think how people here think of Asians. Like in Asia, name brands are if you ever go to an outlet mall, all those if you go like in New York, there's a outlet called Woodbury. But if
Mhm.
you go to all those name brand stores, like filled with Asian tourists, right? And if you go to Korea,
Yeah, that's true.
everybody wants to buy LV. Everybody, and here the things here those are not considered as cool. I think I feel like those mainstream like LV, those kind of brands like Mercedes Benz, those kind of things are not considered as cool. If you're really cool, you might drive a Tesla or you
Okay.
might buy like Alexander McQueen or something like that. But in Korea, no, they want the most mainstream, the popular brand, the one that everybody's gonna know.
That is so funny. Because here, there's also the phenomenon here of the people who wanna be like indie and they try to do
Yeah,
something different, but then other people start doing that, and then whatever was alternative becomes
yeah, that's true.
popular.
Like hipsters,
It's
like
the lumber sexual look, the guys with the plaid shirt and beard.
that
People
started
like
out as
that.
like a kind of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that only hipsters do that. Now, like
Yeah,
everybody's a
and
hipster.
everybody does it. And then they have to invent something else.
It,
It's like
it's
never ending.
yeah.
It would just be easier if we all just conformed.
I actually think that I like that about US. That's my favorite part about here is that not that they conform, but here everybody tries to be unique and different.
Yeah, yeah.
So like we're in America, we're taught that you're special, right? Like everybody has their own unique thing. In Asia, in Korean culture, as well as all other Asian culture, there's this saying, if you're a nail that sticks out, you're gonna get hammered back in. It's a very here that that in Harley Davidson, there's that saying. I forgot. It's like a Latin saying. It's based in English. It translates to out of one like many, like one out of many, or out of one many, or something like that. Like the whole concept is like, everybody's individual, and then we come
Mhm.
together. That's what
E
makes the difference.
pluribus unum on the
Exactly.
money. That's on the currency.
Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
American thing. In Korea, it's the opposite. If you go to Japan and Korea, everybody's like the whole like putting your country before yourself thing.
Uh,
So it's more about the group, the organization,
yeah.
and less about you. So after a baseball game, here, if I go to a baseball game afterwards, it's just garbage everywhere, and the cleaners have to come clean it up. In Korea, everyone picks up their own garbage, and then they pick up other garbage around that they see too. So without the cleaners, like after the game, it's just already spotless. It's clean. Like they're so good at. In Korea, they recycle. Like they'll wash their can with water and rinse it out, and they have a different recycle for cans versus paper versus they have a different recycle for everything. So it's a very community driven
Mm.
culture. They're actually like very communistic in that sense, where it's more about the community than yourself, like very selfless kind of thing. But the downside of that is that everybody becomes the same. Everybody becomes like basically conform.
Right.
Everyone's just a pawn in the. It's very easy to manipulate Korean people because for the government to manipulate the citizens of Korea, it's much easier than it's pretty easy here too. But in Korea, it's much easier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, that is really interesting. I do think there are a lot of advantages to being aware and have respect for the community around you like that.
Yeah,
I don't like that when people leave their garbage. I think
yeah, yeah.
that's
In
very
that sense, it's good.
well. But
People are
yes,
very respectful.
but you're right. There's always a downside to everything. You cannot have a perfect
Yeah,
situation in
yeah.
that way.
The weakness is the strength, and strength.
Weakness is
Like,
the strength. You just did a whole thing on that.
you know,
So, when you were done with high school, did you go to college?
oh yeah, I did
Yeah.
go. By the way, though, with the weakness
Yeah.
strength thing. So because people are so respectful, so in Korea, there's like huge respect thing towards elderly, right? And
Oh,
people with
yeah.
experience and things like that. So there's even a complete different honorific language. If you talk to somebody who's older than you, you talk different than somebody who's at the same age or younger, right? So it's so much to a degree that like Korean Air has the most accidents in the world. And they found out the reason why is because like back in the 80s, like a Korean Air plane crashed and they pulled out the black box. And what they found out is that the co-pilot, there's a captain and then I guess the co-pilot or the first, whatever, first mate or whatever it's called.
Mm.
Like this person was actually correct and the older captain was wrong. But because he was older, he just insisted. And it turned out that was the reason. And that's like a very common occurrence in Korea where just because out of this like pure blind respect thing, younger people that are smarter cannot move. There's less meritocracy because of that.
Yeah, which is dangerous in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
exactly. In the airplane, it's
Yeah, you
definitely
definitely want the best pilot on the job. You definitely want the best brain surgeon on the job.
exactly.
I love the way that's bringing to light that there's always an opposite view.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
always a different perspective, and that's why
yeah,
it's so important to stay open-minded about things.
yeah,
Like, having a fixed mindset does not serve anyone well,
yeah.
especially in situations like that. That's really interesting. All
Yeah,
right.
so I went to so my senior year, we moved from LA to like my entire life, all the way up until I guess I was like 20. Even now, actually, in my family, like my sister is like the crown jewel of our family. My sister went to Juilliard. My mom is a musician, so she's
Oh,
very into music. And my
okay.
sister went to Juilliard, and she's like the she was like the goody two. She was like the good model child that they always want to show off. So when my sister got into Juilliard, my entire family decided to move to New York for her,
Oh,
basically.
did
So
they take you with them?
yeah, so my senior year. So just think about this. Imagine you're senior, like so you have all your friends here and things like
Yeah.
that. Senior year, they gave me a choice. They said you can stay here with and live with your grandma for a year, or you can come with us. And I didn't want to live with my grandma.
Yeah.
So I moved. I came with them. We didn't move to New York. We moved to New Jersey, which is like
Okay.
45 minutes away from New York. So I went my senior year. I went to high school in New Jersey, and then while I was there, my so New York and New Jersey, like upstate New York and New Jersey, is we were like 30 minutes away from
Mhm.
upstate New York. My parents bought a house upstate New York, and I ended up going to a school called Binghamton University, which is a state university. It's like a state school, New York State school. Because my sister went to such an expensive school, like a private school, like they couldn't afford to send me to a private school. And they didn't want me to take out a huge loan. So I ended up going to a state school. And yeah, so I went to Binghamton. I dropped out my sophomore year, actually. So I never finished college, actually.
I was wondering about that because I think it's a really good thing to show people that you don't need to finish college to be successful.
Oh, yeah. But
You
I
know,
think everyone knows that now.
I don't know if everyone knows it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I
I know
spent,
so many people who dropped out of college or didn't go to college at all, like uber successful. So maybe like it's just in my circle.
no, I think that's true. That's very true. But I do think there's still a mindset of that that's your path. You have to go high school, college, and then
Yeah.
go out into the
Yeah, I guess you're right. If you
world.
want to get a regular office job
Right.
or you want to be,
A
you know,
certain
yeah,
certification, like being
yeah,
a doctor or
doctor
something
or
like that. Yeah.
or pharmacist, or even pharmacy is a very popular job in the Asian culture because it's apparently the safest job.
Oh,
Because it's like you'll never not get a job, find a job. It's
yeah.
also pretty well paying, and
Yes.
you don't need that much education.
Okay.
So it's like the
Oh.
perfect.
Oh, that's
It's like the ideal job that everyone wants.
the ideal job, pharmacy.
It's like the most boring job like
Oh,
ever.
oh, yes, I would not wanna be every pharmacist I ever see is miserable. They just
Yeah,
look miserable.
yeah, exactly. It's like the safest route you could, like, see, Asian people love that. Koreans love the safe route because
Mm,
I think because our parents have struggled so much that they want their kids to have the safest life possible, right? So they don't want their kids
mhm.
to become an artist or become an entrepreneur or anything like that.
Yeah, but I feel like you don't fit that mold. No,
Yeah, that's why I was like considered not such a good kid in my in my parents' eyes.
in your parents' eyes, like the black sheep.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I think my parents like really were worried about me actually when I
Uh-huh.
dropped out of school. And I remember I had a falling out with my parents, so I didn't talk to them for 10 years. Since from
Oh,
basically when I was 20 to 30,
wow.
like we didn't keep in touch at all. And 30 years later or 10 years later when I actually went to Korea, and this was probably like 15 years later actually because we talked over the phone. And then when I went to Korea, like I remember my dad telling me like, "Oh, I'm thankful that you didn't turn out like you turned out okay."
Oh,
Basically.
oh my
So
gosh.
they must have been worried about me.
I'm sure they
Uh,
were worried about you. Do you wanna talk about that? Do you wanna go into that a bit?
sure. Yeah.
Why did you have the falling out?
So my dad so after okay, I'm on the backtrack. In high school, I didn't study at all. Mm. But I maintained a 3.7 GPA just because high school is easy. That's just not that hard.
Yeah.
But then when I went to college, I think what happened was it was the first time I had freedom, right? So nobody's there to force me to go to class. So I literally just didn't go to class. And I was partying all the time. So because I lived under such a strict house rules, like strict rules, when I had what I realized is that's why being so strict is not such a great thing. Because as soon as you have that freedom, you're gonna go all out, right? It's
Mhm.
kind of like the more you restrict, like a rubber band, right? The more you try to restrict, the more you're gonna bounce back, right? So that's what happened to me. So my freshman year, I got into academic probation. I got like a 1.5 GPA or something like that. And I thought, oh, in high school, I, I, I aced high school like without trying. So I figured, oh, I'll do the same, but it just wasn't the case. So then, like my sophomore year, I got kicked out because I did it again, but I didn't tell my parents. So I stayed up there, like lying to my parents. And then when my dad found out, he was like, "I'm coming to pick you up right now." So he came to pick me up. Actually, my sophomore year is when I got into academic probation, which meant I had to go to a community college for one semester, and then I can go back to school. And at that time, so I was in that community college for 6 months. So if I stayed there, I would have just went back to school, but he didn't even want me to. Like,
Oh,
so he pulled me out. He basically pulled me out of school,
mm,
and I started working at this place. So it was like a computer shop where they every weekend we would go to these computer fairs. There's this computer fairs where all the geeks go to, and they buy computer parts, and you can actually buy a computer too. And my job was to go there and sell computers, basically. So I worked there. I got a part time job there while I was actually in school. And then when I left, I was their top salesperson and they gave me a full time job. So I was getting paid like $2,000 a month to work there full time. So when my dad pulled me out, I just did that. And while I was there was another guy that worked there part time. And his day job was he worked at an insurance company in Queens. But it was like an insurance company owned by this Chinese guy. So it was like a big insurance company in the Chinese community, which means it's still a mom and pop shop. But this is 98. And that's when internet started booming, right? That's when eBay was pets.com and all that shit. So that guy wanted to jump on that .com bubble. So he started a website called bidandshop.com. So it was like a shopping. It was a stupid. He didn't know anything about the internet. He just wanted to jump on the bandwagon, right? And he needed a web designer. So he got me a job there. So what I did was I left, but my dad didn't want me to go there. Like he still wanted me to live at home.
Mm.
And I guess he didn't trust me. And I got into this huge fight. I was like, I don't care. I don't care what. And then I just left home. And then I stopped talking to him. The way I left home was like I got into a huge argument with him. And I basically told him that you don't control my life. And I just screamed at him and left. And
Wow.
then since then, I was like, I think I was 20 at that time. So until from 20 to 30, like I didn't talk to him at all.
Oh, wow. Did you stay in
Yeah.
touch with your mom?
No,
Neither of them.
no.
So what
Think
made you reach back out after all that time?
so I think they did try to like get in touch with me a few times. And I talked to my sister. So
Oh,
actually I did keep in touch with my sister, but I ignored them. And I
mhm.
was young, I was stupid. So it was like that rebellious part of me. But when I was 30, I got that's when I got engaged to Gigi.
Okay.
Like so obviously I have to tell my parents that I'm gonna get married. So I think the first time I reached out was to tell them that I'm getting married.
Okay.
And then that's when we started talking again. So it
Okay.
wasn't like a clear moment. It was time when I can't live the rest of my life not talking to them. Another big thing is when I was 20, actually right after I moved out, they moved to Korea. They moved back to Korea.
So
My
you
sister
left
graduated, yeah. A year after I moved out, they
and then
moved
they
back to
moved
Korea, yeah. So it was even harder to, like,
to communicate.
to
Did you
communicate or
feel anything about that? That they had left you or
yeah, I felt like I didn't care, obviously, because that's when I was, like, 21, 20, and I was like, "Okay, good riddance," right? But then somewhere deep inside, I was like, "That's fucked up." That they did but, like, why would they, like, consult with me? It doesn't matter.
yeah.
I wasn't living at home, I wasn't even talking to them. But they moved back to Korea as soon as my sister graduated from Juilliard, and my sister actually moved back with them.
So your whole family left when you were in your 20s.
Yeah. And that's why I felt like all throughout my 20s, I felt like I didn't have any family. Every Christmas and every holiday, like, all my friends would go back home, go back to Michigan, and go back to wherever they're
Mm.
from, and to family, and I was basically in New York City alone, and New York is empty during those times. And so only the restaurant you can go to is a Chinese restaurant. They're the only ones open. And literally, like the only people in there were me. Sometimes like a friend of mine would stay, not go back home that year or something. Then it would be the two of us. And then like bunch of Jewish people getting off work to kind of celebrate Christmas.
Wow. So if you could characterize that time of your life, what kind of words would you use to characterize it?
I guess it was kind of like that feeling of like when you're away from home I don't know if you were away from home
Yep,
in college or
I was.
but when you go back home, there's always that feeling of, "Oh, I feel safe, I'm back home." And then when you're in college, it's like a little bit more wild times.
Yeah.
And then so I feel like I had 10 years of that, basically. 10 years of this, like, unsettling and when you live in New York City, it's sad because I meet some people in New York that are, like, 60 years old, but they live in a studio apartment. They're still working like a very like a part-time job or something like that. Like
Mhm.
they've never settled down and they never built a home and built a family because they're like this kind of like this like free will and Bob Dylan life. So they never actually because most people what happens is a lot of people in New York are not originally from New York. So when you're in New York, most people are from somewhere. So I feel like New York is one of those places where people go there for a few years and then they go back home or they move out of New York at some point to start a family and they move to New Jersey or Long Island or back home or whatever. They get married and start a family and they build their own family. Right now, they settle down and they become adults. But the people who don't move out of New York, who stay there, they basically stay like a teenager forever. So like you meet a lot of these 56-year-old people, like hippies, who are still living like they're in college or something like that. And it's a little bit sad.
It's
And that's
definitely
kind of
sad.
how I saw myself going that route if I kept,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
If you kept in that vein.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what were you doing in your 20s for work? You were still working in computers?
My life is like all over the place. So after I was in that like .com job for a year, and then I this is in 2000, and then I ended up getting a job. I made all these websites for people I knew and things like that. I used that as a portfolio. And this was like during the .com bubble, right? 2000 to get a job at this agency, my first agency, and they just hired me right away. And I was almost like I was actually like an intern. But when I went there, I didn't know how to use photo. That's when I didn't like. I was still like I was self taught. I was using a PC. I was like learning how to do everything myself, and I was doing it all wrong, basically. But when I went there, they were using like Macs. They were using Adobe Photoshop and Dreamweaver and all this the proper. So I learned how to do everything proper way there.
Okay.
And there was like an art director there who I just followed him around and he taught me everything. That was actually a pretty big moment because when I went there, that art director called me a designer. So for the first time, somebody called me a designer. And that had a huge impact. And not only that, it was in a professional setting. So at that time, I was on this team that works on Citibank. It was a project for Citigroup. And so it was like a big client. And I went in the meeting and he called me a designer. I was like, oh. And not only that, in the company, how we worked is like they would have 4 designers go in, and each designer would do their own version of the design, like a mood board.
Mhm.
And then the client picks one.
Mm.
And whoever's design they pick is the one who's going to work on that project. And that was like my first month I was there. And I was like staying up every night learning from that art director. And that client picked my design. So looking back now, I have no idea why, because my design actually sucked compared to the other designer, but clients don't know anything.
Yeah.
So I actually spent the, I guess, first 6 months there working on that project and I learned so much. And my job was a designer, but because I knew how to code a little bit, like my own ghetto fabulous way. And but there was also another developer there who was like so much better than me. But I worked with him and he taught me a lot. So the 11 months I was there, I probably learned more than what most people do in 5 years. Just because
Wow.
I was so into it. I was like, it was my life. And then 11 months later is when the .com bubble burst
Oh,
and I got laid off.
okay.
That company actually got bought out and 90% of us got laid off. And it sucked because they had security walk me out, so it hurt my ego a little
Oh.
bit. But I was happy because they gave me a 6-month severance pay. So I basically didn't have to work for 6 months and I was getting paid my salary, right?
Yeah.
On top of unemployment insurance.
Okay.
So I was like, "Oh shit, I made it." Like I was like,
The American dream.
yeah, yeah. So because of that, and at that time, I remember like in that previous the Chinese boss company I was in, at that time, this is when people were using dial-up and this T1 line just started coming out, like the faster internet. And there was this Korean guy, his last name was also Yi, same as mine, who was a salesperson for Verizon, or I don't know what it was called back then, but like one of those telecom companies. And the company I worked in was their client. So like once a month or every couple months, he would stop by, do his old sales building relationship thing. But because we had the same last name, we started talking and we became friends. And he said, "Hey, we should start our own agency, and I can do the sales, and you can make the website." So right after that .com thing, I got laid off. We got this like $500 a month office on down 3 blocks away from World Trade Center,
Mhm.
and we started. And for a few months we were there, and then 9/11 happened.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we weren't really making money anyway, so we
Mhm.
parted away. And then I was like, I don't want to deal with this is too much stress for me, like this entrepreneurship and things like that. So I just wanted to get a normal, boring 9 to 5 job. And at that time, I moved in with one of my college friends. So all my friends from college, they were still in school while this whole thing was happening
All
for me.
right.
And then at that time, it was like the time when everybody was graduating and stuff like that. And one of my college friend, like I decided to move in with him to a place in Brooklyn, and he got me a job in the company he's working at. Was at that time he was working at Bravo, the TV channel.
Oh, yeah.
And back then, Bravo was owned by a company called Rainbow Media, which was owned by this company called Cablevision. And it was like a huge company, but now they're called AMC Network, like
Oh,
Walking Dead, AMC. But so I got a job there just in IT, in the help desk, because I knew a lot about computers, even though I'm not like a computer technician. I got a job there getting $45,000 a year, the most boring 9 to 5 job you can possibly think of. And I was there for 5 years. And in those 5 years, I guess what I realized is I can see how people can fall into that 9 to 5 hole. Because you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you have your benefits, you get your 401k, you get your coffee and donuts in the morning, you get your Christmas bonus. I heard one day, the rich dad, poor dad guy.
yeah.
I heard
Robert
him say one
Kiyosaki.
day, yeah, Robert Kiyosaki. I heard him say that once you start getting a paycheck, your brain turns off.
Mm.
And that resonated with me so much because that's exactly what happened to me. I was stuck there for 5 years because I had such a comfy,
Yeah.
cushy life. But while I was there, that company also owns a channel called Fuse, which is like a MTV competitor. And there I met a couple of guys they were PAs, which is basically you're like an intern for a TV studio. One of the things I noticed in that industry is that everybody there works for dirt cheap because people want to get in that industry so bad that they're willing to work for almost nothing. So like MTV, like really take advantage of a lot of these kids for that reason.
Yeah.
So they were one of those two kids, but they were aspiring filmmakers. So they were making a short film and they asked me to be like an extra in the film. And then while I was there, I saw them shooting everything and I was like, I just fell in love with the whole process. I got really into it. So I was like, oh, I'm going to take some film class. So I signed up for this evening class in your film academy and I got really into filmmaking. And I'm like, this is what I want to do. And then I wanted to buy this camera. And around that time, this is like after 5 year, around the 4 or 5 year mark, I finally decided to leave that company. And I ended up getting a job in your film academy as a web designer. I was still making some websites because I knew how to make websites. I made a
Mhm.
website for them, those two guys.
Okay.
I made a website for the department that I worked in Bravo. So I made a few websites just for people I know for free. So I used that portfolio to get a job at Neuro Film Academy. And
Mm.
I loved it because when I went to Neuro Film Academy, I was the only one. Basically, I was their entire marketing department. In the year there, I learned SEO. I learned how Google pay per click works and all of that. But I hated my boss there. My boss there was an asshole.
Oh,
While I was there, I started doing some projects on the side, but nothing really worked out. By then, I saved up some money. So I left. I quit that job and I said, I'm going to freelance. I'm going to do some projects and I'm going to freelance making websites until I have enough money to buy that camera.
oh,
And then I'm going to
yeah.
make my film.
Okay.
And then, but then that didn't turn out like that at all. I quit. And I quit like spontaneously. Like one day he yelled at me and I yelled back at him and then I just left. And then,
Kind of like what you did with your dad, huh?
yeah, it's like a,
The
that's like a
pattern's
repeating
happening.
pattern.
Yes.
And that pattern actually continued
Really?
until I realized I was doing that. And I realized that I was cutting a lot of people out of my life.
Yeah.
So anyway, at that time, I, my first project was a friend of mine who recently started selling baby clothing. So I made a website for her using Yahoo store. This is before Shopify. This is
Okay.
every e-commerce store back then, you custom built from
Uh-huh.
scratch. Okay. But then there was this thing called Yahoo store, and every Yahoo store looks exactly the same, but you can actually customize it. But nobody ever customizes to the degree that I did. I customized the hell out of it to a point where when I called Yahoo for tech support, they were like, "Wait, is this the Yahoo store?" They didn't even recognize it. You know how like back then you can pimp my MySpace? Like
Yeah.
I customized the hell. Like I basically hacked it
Yeah.
to customize it. But that took me 9 months to build, and she only paid me $1,700. So
Okay.
I quit my $100,000 a year job to and while paying like $2,400 a month in rent in New York.
Oh, no.
So she basically paid me less than my monthly rent,
Your
right?
rent.
And that took me 9 months. I was running out of money. But then right after I launched that site, another person contacted me because they saw that site. That woman paid me $3,000 to make
Mm,
a Yahoo store for her. But this time it only took me 3 months because I learned a lot.
you knew, right?
But still, it's not nowhere near enough money for me to be profitable. So that whole year, I made like $5,000 in that whole year. So I was like 2 weeks away from I was gonna apply for new jobs. But then right then, this company called me. They were like some investment firm, and they paid me $10,000 to do a simple WordPress website, which basically only took me a month to do. Did their logo and I did their website, and
Mhm.
basically only took me a month. And that actually client became my first client when I started Night Owl, by the way, my
Okay.
agency. I was lucky because you know how I'm starting Night Owl Nation right now? That's basically how my business started because even though I was just giving everything away and I wasn't making money, I didn't have resentment at all because I love doing it. I
And you
love
were
the fact
building something for the future.
exactly. Yeah. So I'm not gonna lie, I was scared.
Yeah.
But in the last month, I got the $10,000. Okay, I'm good for another couple months. So I got that project. But while in the middle of that project, I got another call from this company called, this is before Uber days. It's called Dial 7. And it's the biggest car service company in New York.
Okay.
And they paid me $17,000 to build their website. I think around the same time, I got a call from this company that made all of these micro websites, like
Mhm.
just landing pages for these big companies. So I got a regular contract gig with them. So they were paying me like $3,000 a month just to
Mhm.
work like a couple hours a week.
Nice.
So yeah, so that's when my freelance career actually started taking off.
Mm.
But then I was project managing, I was doing everything myself and I was getting burnt out a little bit.
Yeah.
But around that time, I reconnect with my friend that I started my first agency with 10 years before that.
Oh.
By the way, this is around the time I met Gigi while I was working in New York Film Academy.
Yeah, that's my question. How did you meet Gigi?
I started dating Gigi at that time. So that 1 year of me freelancing, so that was like basically like right before I left that New York Film Academy, I met her. But she was still working at New York Film Academy
You met
while I
at
was
work.
yeah. Yeah, she worked at New York Film Academy too. So I quit, she stayed. And then I was freelancing. And then I reconnect with that guy. And he actually took the agency that we started, that we decided to fold. He actually started back up and he had 12 employees working for him.
Oh.
So when I went there, he asked me to basically become a partner in that company, like a smaller stake partner in that company. So for I think 20% or 30% of equity. So I was burnt out at that time of doing everything myself. So I was like, I talked to Gigi and then I was like, fuck it, yeah, let's do it. Oh, you know what? At first I said no for 3 months, but he lured me in. He's like, why don't you just work out of my office then? You can do your own thing. But while I was there, I like met all the people there and stuff like that. And it made sense. What really drove me there was the same reason why I wanted to work in your film academy was that agency was such a mess. Everybody was so like not good that I felt like I could really make a difference in that company, right? They were making websites for like $1,500, $3,000, like
Mm.
templated, like a
Mhm.
factory. When I got there, within 2 years, I think our revenue tripled.
Oh.
And I really helped that company like get to a certain point. But then I had a falling out with him because we had such a difference in he just wanted to sell. To give you an idea, we had 80 projects on the pipeline that we were working on. I couldn't sleep at night because of that, because these are 80 projects that we need to push out the door.
Wow.
And all the employees were like, we were like killing ourselves trying to get these
Mhm.
projects done. But he was only focused on selling more projects.
Selling more.
So we had a falling out. And I found out that he was using the company money to buy all this shit for himself and all of that. So I was like, fuck it, I'm leaving. And then I left that company. But then like 6 of the employees there, oh, what I didn't tell you is a year into there, I actually hired Gigi to come work for me at that company.
Okay.
And I actually hired one of my best friends who was a programmer. He was working at Macmillan Publishing
Okay.
to quit his job and come work for me too. So I had two people that I hired since I was there.
Yeah.
When I decided to leave, obviously they're going to come with me.
Yeah.
So it was three of us, but then four other people in the company also wanted to come with us.
All right.
So what we did was when we started Night Owl, so right after, that's when I started Night Owl, my
Yeah.
agency.
So that was the beginning of Night Owl.
But because seven of us left the company, which was pretty much like almost half the team, there's no way they can finish those projects. So what he said was, why don't you take half the projects with you? And the way that company worked is they pay half the contract upfront and then half when it's done. And when you finish the project, you can take the half the remaining balance. We were like, okay. But then it was actually the worst decision that we've ever made because we pretty much ended up doing the entire work for half the price.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So we
Yes.
spent the first year of Night Owl basket finishing up that company's projects. And so
Wow.
we lost. Gigi and I saved up like maybe $40,000-$50,000 for our wedding. We ended up blowing through all of that.
Oh,
Um,
oh wow.
and then like our employees one by one started leaving because we weren't making money. And then even my friend that we hired, like he ended up leaving too. So by then it was just me and Gigi left.
My gosh.
And this one intern who followed us.
Wow.
So it was basically the three of us were left after a year. And
Okay.
this is a time when we rented out our apartment. We had an apartment in East Village that we rented out on Airbnb. So we can use that money to fund this project. So I went through that. Remember, I said I was running out of money. I was about to go get a job when that
Yeah.
project came. I was in that moment again.
Oh my
And this
gosh.
is why I believed in like the whole it's the darkest before dawn.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? We were like sleeping in the office. In the morning, we would go to New York Sports Club to take a shower.
Oh,
And so while that was happening, we finished our project. And then that's when like new starter projects coming in.
yeah.
And when the new starter project coming in, we started to just not be profitable, but at least break even.
Yeah.
Like at least be able to like keep our cash
Sleep in
flow
your
going.
apartment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then and then from there, one of the things we realized is that we were digging our own hole because in order to keep the cash flow going, we were taking on projects that might have been problematic
Okay.
and at a lesser cost than we normally
Right.
would. Because
Yeah.
so we were like, we need to somehow save money. So we just worked our ass off for 6 months, maybe 8 months, just like working nonstop. And just for those 8 months, our only goal was to just make as much money as we can and save as much money as we can. And then we did that. And once we got to a little bit, like we had 3 months of runway.
Yeah.
Now I had the confidence to go into sales meeting and be like, no, our price is this.
Yeah.
So we were able to raise our prices. And yeah, the rest is history. So at that point on, our pricing went from we were doing $5,000 websites to $10,000 websites to 20,000. When this is what I did. Every time we closed 4 projects in a row at that price, we doubled our price.
Oh,
So then and then
that's
we
a
get
good
4
strategy.
yeah. Once we got 4 projects without any kind of objections, then we doubled our price again, and we kept doing that until we hit about 50K. 50K was like the average projects that we were doing. This was like maybe 4 years into it, and from that point on, we just maintained that.
And how did you
Yeah.
get to work with such people like Mel Robbins and Gabby
Oh,
Bernstein?
yeah. So in the beginning, the clients that we were working with was all different kind of tech startups. But then once we started, like one time we got American Red Cross, and that was a
Okay.
$200,000 project.
Nice.
And then because of American Red Cross, we also got Columbia University Medical Center. And because we got Columbia University Medical Center, we got NYU Langone Medical Center. What I realized is that once you start working with certain type of clients, it's much easier to get similar type of clients. So we
Yes.
somehow fell into this like medical, like hospitals and like pharmaceutical companies. So what happened was around that time, like 5, 6 years into it, I got really bored because those projects, yeah, they pay really well. but you're not doing anything innovative. So I feel like my kind of skills just went down. Like we were doing all this crew Koopa, and then I feel like it went down. But
Mhm.
around that time, Gabby found us, and just out of just at that time, because I knew SEO, and this was the
Mhm.
early days of SEO. Like if
Mhm.
you search web design company in New York, like we were number one. We were ranked number one.
Oh.
So like we were like that's how people found us. But when Gabby came, oh, one thing that I did also, which I actually learned from the previous company, was in the contract we put that every time we build a website, we're gonna put our credit on the bottom on the footer. So it'll
Yeah.
say website designed by Night Owls or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that also brought us. And so by the time Gabby came in, we already had that in place. So when Gabby came, I didn't know who she was, but she really loved our work. Like at that time, we did a micro website for Spotify. We did website for I don't know if Swab Auto, but
Oh,
every
yeah.
one of those every one of those websites, I went over and beyond. Yes, those boring websites pay the bills, but I didn't
Yeah.
put any of them in the portfolio.
Okay.
The ones that I put in the portfolio are the ones we lost money on, but we went over and beyond. There are cool
Mhm.
animations and all of that, right?
Mhm.
So she saw those, and then she came to us, and we built a website for her, and I just went all out. And that's when I found my spark again.
Mm.
Because it's different when I'm working with, let's say, the marketing manager at American Red Cross. Essentially, my client is a 9 to 5 worker who's 25-year-old
Right.
with a marketing degree who
Yeah.
doesn't care about innovation. She just doesn't want to lose her job.
Yeah.
Versus when I work with Gabby, like I'm working with the stakeholder directly. So I
Yeah.
found that passion again, and we did a lot of innovative stuff.
Yeah.
And I think at that time it was like one of the best, most fanciest personal brand websites.
Yeah.
So her website got featured on all these blogs of like top 10 personal brand websites or top 10
Oh,
like influencer website or something like that.
that's awesome.
So yeah, and I didn't know she was famous. So she wasn't really famous back then. She
Yeah.
was on her way up.
Uh-huh.
But because her website was getting traffic and on the bottom it says
Was your
website,
name.
but yeah.
Mhm.
So we started getting a lot of other personal brands,
Mhm.
and she introduced us to Jay Shetty.
Okay.
She introduced us to Colette Baron Reed, like all these like Sonia Choquette, all these other woo kind
Yes.
of authors.
I love
So
them. They're my people.
yeah, yeah,
That's my question. I don't know if you buy into this, but do
yeah,
you think because it was Gabby Bernstein and she has a very high vibe, do
yeah.
you think that helped you find your spark because it was her?
Yeah. I think that yes, because first of all, I was one of those people who was like, "What? Who's Tony Robbins?" Like the self-help world was like a different world to me. I didn't even
Okay.
know that world existed
Yeah.
until I met Gabby and I went to some of her events. And then I started meeting all this like other that's when I was like got into that whole woo world.
Yeah.
So I went down that whole rabbit hole, and then I started getting into the self-help and all of that.
Start
And
meditating.
yeah, exactly. So all of that happened after that. And then I just fell in love with that world.
Yeah.
So when she started bringing us all these clients, we work with them. And again, like on the bottom of their website, it's all our link.
Love it.
So
Yeah.
that attract us to get more people that are
So
like, so,
good.
so a couple years into it, we decided to shift our whole niche to just
Mhm.
doing personal brand websites. There was like a 3-year period where it was like overlapping, and then we completely shifted.
Mm.
And then I think when we worked with Mark Randolph, I don't know if it was Mark Randolph. Oh, when we worked with the Michael Brody Waite, he went viral on TEDx, and he wrote a book called Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts, or something like that. He was like a former addict
Okay.
who went through this whole thing. And this guy founded a company, like a Inc. 500 company that he ended up selling, and then he wrote a book. And I was like, "Why? Really? Like you founded an Inc. 500, you exited from 3 different companies, and now you wanna be a YouTuber?" I don't get it. But around that time, Will Smith just started his YouTube channel, and he
Oh.
literally had 40,000 subscribers. I'm like, "What?" And then I saw Kevin Leary doing that. So all these like billionaires
Mm.
like are retiring, writing their book and building their personal brands. So I was like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? And then that's when it clicked for me. I was like, oh, like I think personal brand is the because and then I saw what Elon Musk was doing, and then I saw that Kylie Jenner, her cosmetics company got valued at $1 billion. I just saw everybody jumping into that bandwagon. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I think there's something here. And I was like, I need to build my own personal brand. I was really busy. So I hired a videographer and I spent all this time on equipment. And I'm like, I'm going to be the agent Gary Vee. And then have this guy follow me around doing my blog. We did that 12 episode and nobody was watching it. It was like 20 views. I think only our employees were watching it. We're literally, I would go to client meeting and then this guy would follow me and the client's like, what the fuck? like,
You are
but
so funny.
because I think at that time I was just all fed up on the surface. Oh, like how Gary Vee does those. Oh, that's so cool. I wasn't really focused on the content. It was very selfish.
Yeah.
I was focused on having cool intro and then make it with cool music and cool shots and blah, blah, blah. And then another couple years have passed by since then. And during that time, I worked with Baron Baptiste from Baptiste Yoga. So I started getting into yoga and things like
Mhm.
that. And 2 years later, I actually went to a retreat for Baptiste to shoot. I was shooting a documentary for them. And that was the week that COVID lockdown happened. So literally, well, I was there for a week and there's no internet, no nothing there. It was like complete like detox, digital detox.
Yeah.
So we didn't know what was going on in the
Oh,
world, but you know how it happened quickly, like within
it
a matter
did.
of before we went, I heard about it, but it wasn't a big deal.
Yep.
But the day we left was like I think when the lockdown started, and like literally our airplane was empty. And then when we landed, it was like New York City was like felt different, right? So
Yes.
that's when COVID happened. We were like immediately decided to have everybody work from home.
Yeah.
So I was working home from a month, and then we were like recording every Zoom call. And that's when I was like, one day I was having a conversation with one of our interns who was struggling to find passion. I was giving some advice. And I just took this time, I was like, oh, I'm going to try this personal branding thing again since I'm stuck at home all day.
Right.
This time I didn't do any fancy things. I just took a 3-minute clip of what I was telling her. I edited it a little bit and I just uploaded it on Instagram. And then I just kept doing that. And then that's when I found and then that's when I actually this time I instead of outsourcing, I did it myself. I went on, I started engaging with people, I started meeting
Yeah.
with a few people, and somebody told me about Crystal, so I went to check out Crystal, and I saw this YouTube video of him talking about how carousel is like the next thing. So I was like, "Oh, I know how to make I know how to design, so let me try to make some carousels." So I started making some carousels, and then, like, my stuck carousel started taking off, and then boom, it just
Yeah.
the rest is history.
Yeah, because you just understand how it's the perfect combination of creativity and an analytical mind. Because you can look at something, a phenomenon that's happening, whatever it is, and you can just pick it apart, figure out why it's working the way it is, and then you replicate it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it
And
was
it's
very similar to making websites. I think that's what made us successful with those personal brands because I didn't know it at the time, but most designers just care about the design aesthetics. So when a designer works on something, they just have this lorem ipsum. They don't even care what the content is. They're
right.
just trying to put this wrapping on it. But
Yeah.
I quickly realized because I'm a business owner,
Yeah.
so I understand how important the content is. And
Mhm.
after I worked with Gabby, I took a copywriting course. I learned Gab was friends with Murray Folio, so I learned about Murray Folio and I learned about Copy Cura, and I
Yeah.
took that copywriting course, and that's how I know Laura.
That.
And what happened was really started getting into copywriting, and I was like, "Oh, this is a lot like when I was in film school." I focused so much on the shots, but nobody cared about the shots. Like it was all about the story.
Yeah.
So that's when I put the two and two together, and I'm like, I started telling more stories on the websites, and then I realized that you can actually I can support the story with the design rather than
Yeah.
just doing a pretty design. So when we did Mel Robbins' website, that was like the previous version of the website. Her about page starts like with this just completely dark background. I did this for one of Gabby's sales pages too, where it was like a dark background of this woman in her bed with this like phone light. Like it's a really depressing shot
Yeah.
of her checking her social media or something like that. And the copy would be like, imagine this, you scrolling through Instagram, blah, 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 like really depressed, the problem, right?
Yep.
Copy.
Yep.
And then it goes into, so Mel Robbins, you scroll, stuck in a job, stuck in a rut, like stuck in
Mhm.
a bad marriage, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes to Mel Robbins saying, trust me, I've been there. And
Mhm.
then the next shot was equals 5. Because I'm also a coder,
Yeah.
I knew that as I scroll, I can do this 5 countdown, 4, 3, 2,
Mhm.
1, and then immediately go from black to white.
Oh,
It has this hope.
yeah.
And at the same time, I put an image of a really messy bed, like
Okay.
with pizza box and beer cans, blah, blah,
Yep.
blah. And then when it goes to white, it just becomes clean. The bed is made, everything's clean. And then the copy said 5 seconds can change everything.
Mm.
So that's an example of how I started using art,
Yeah.
animation, like technology and
Yeah.
storytelling all combined together and just made a much more impact.
It's so cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I just translated that into carousels when I
I know, but you just have a way of doing it. It's crazy how impactful it is. Because I think your style, like you do all these really creative things for other people, but your own personal style, your branding is
yeah.
very simplistic.
Yeah, yeah.
So what does that say about you?
You know what? I think it became more and more simple over time because what I realized, so one of the things I learned, so that this is why I tell people nothing that you do, you're wasting time. Because if I didn't go to take that film school class, I wouldn't understood about that storytelling part. And if I
Yeah.
didn't do design, I wouldn't have understood going from black to white. If I didn't take that copywriting course, I wouldn't know
Yeah.
every different thing I learned throughout my life all added to what I do. So when I got on Instagram at first, I did it more complex. My copies were longer, but then one time I did a short one and it was like everybody was like, it was a really simple one. I didn't even
Yeah.
spend that much time and people loved it. And then what I realized is that previously when I was making more complex, a lot of people weren't getting it. And that's when I realized like how simple it needs to be. So I made it
Yeah.
even simpler,
Yeah.
simpler. So I feel like Instagram taught me that. Instagram also taught me that the importance of building a community, not just content, but
Mhm.
actually interacting with your people. So every little thing I've ever done in my life, I use it. There's nothing that I learn in different aspects in my life that I don't still use today. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. And what do you do for fun?
For fun. I have a motorcycle, so I love riding a motorcycle is kind of like meditative for me. Because when you're riding a motorcycle, your life is on the line. So you really cannot think about anything else but just 100% put your focus there.
What kind of
So
motorcycle do you ride?
I have a Harley Davidson.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
would
then,
never have guessed you were a Harley
yeah.
dude.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
have said you were a Triumph or something like that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I like Triumph. I like those cafe racers. I have a Sportster, so
Okay.
it's not like those grandpa Harleys.
Not a hog.
It's
Um, I love that. My boyfriend has a lot of motorcycles, so I ride with him a lot. And
Oh, really?
yes, I love riding the motorcycle. You'll have to come down in where we live in the country and ride.
I
It would be
know.
fun. There's
Yeah,
a lot of good riding down here.
yeah.
Where do you normally ride your motorcycle?
New York, like upstate,
You take it upstate.
like Fairmont, New Jersey.
Yep.
I love like smelling like the cow
Yes.
shit,
Yep.
the nature. Like, because when you're in a car, you don't feel like when you're in a motorcycle, you literally feel all of that. Like,
That's right.
I love that.
You can
Yeah.
feel it. You can feel the air on your arms.
Yeah.
What does that do for you internally? You said it was meditative. Like but what is it?
Yeah,
What
I'm
do you
always
get from
happy
that? Yeah.
afterwards. After I come home from riding, I'm always like on a high.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also
Just
love riding in groups
okay.
because like there's like motorcycle also has a community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does Gigi ride with you?
Yeah.
She does.
Sometimes. Yeah. She loves it.
Yeah. It's really freeing, isn't it? Freeing in a way. My boyfriend, he got these communicators for us a while ago so we can talk while we're riding.
Ah, that's cool.
And yeah, it's great
Otherwise,
in
you
a
have to
lot of ways.
scream.
Yes. And you can only talk when you're at the stop sign and did you see it? But because we have these communicators, it actually took away some of my feeling of peace because I used to like just riding on the back and just being kind of
Mm,
in my own world and
yeah,
enjoying.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You can smell everything. I love smelling the flowers. I always notice like the honeysuckle, the pine,
Mm,
things like that. And now that we have this, he likes to talk a lot. And it's fine. I love being able to talk with him, but I love the being quiet too.
yeah.
So I
And you
understand.
can't check your phone or anything like
No,
that. So
you
if
can't
you're
check
going
your
for like, a
phone.
long ride, yeah,
Yeah. I've thought about how do I get a picture of myself on the motorcycle, but you
yes,
can't
yeah,
safely do that. You can't
yeah,
do it. It takes away all of those weird concerns we
yeah.
have.
Maybe that's why it's meditative because
Yep.
you can't do any of those things
You
when
can't
you're
do
on the
any of those
motorcycle.
things. All you can do is concentrate because really it is life or death. You have to be
Yeah,
concentrating.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also
Um,
love like when you go through the woods, like actually smelling the trees and
oh, yeah.
yeah,
It's wonderful, isn't it? Oh my
yeah.
gosh, I love that. All right. So I want to know, what do you consider the worst thing about mediocrity?
That's a good question.
Because you're all about excellence.
I don't know if I'm all about excellence, but I think I'm all about fully experiencing something as much as you can, right?
Mm,
Because even when you ride a motorcycle, like you can do it half ass, or
yeah.
you can really fully experience something like.
Yeah.
And I guess it's because the Dunning-Kruger effect, kind of like that. Like when you start, when I learned how to snowboard, yes, once I get to a part where I can go down, blah, 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 and that's kind of where most people stop, right, in that level.
Hmm.
But the truth is, before I even heard of Dunning-Kruger level, this is what I always used to say to my employees: everything you learn in life, there's this point, there's this bar here, and until you hit that bar, you think that's everything you need to know, and you think you got it. But then once you hit past that bar, you realize there's a whole nother world to it, right? Like in design,
Hmm.
in the first couple years, I thought I was the shit. But then once I started realizing, okay, you can actually use design to tell a story and all of those other things, like, like now I'm like, oh, there's never ending thing to design, right?
Yep.
I feel like most people just give up before like once they know how to play Stairway to Heaven and a few songs here, they stop playing guitar. But then once you pass that bar, there's a whole new world there.
That's right.
I think that's the like, and mediocrity is when you stop there.
Yeah.
And I just feel like most people are living life not fully experiencing their life experience. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be yoga, it can be riding a motorcycle, it can be skiing. It doesn't matter what it really is. Like just do it to the max
Yep. Yep.
because there's a whole new world out there once you
Right.
pass that bar.
So true.
That's fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, and you can get to that level of mediocrity in anything you do. Like my mediocre is different from your mediocre, is different from
Yeah,
Elon
yeah,
Musk's mediocre.
that's true. That's true. I'm probably mediocre to some people.
Oh my gosh. All right. Before we get into the lessons and the blessings, I want to know the answer to this one. What are you fighting for?
I guess I think one of the reasons why I can pass that mediocrity point is I get obsessive, right? So, like right now, I'm obsessed about teaching storytelling, right?
You are. I can
So,
attest.
yeah, I guess I'm fighting for different things at different moments in my life. Yeah, I always feel like I naturally lived my life like that in the beginning. And then when I found out about Start With Why, Simon Sinek, that's when it actually distracted me because I
Mhm.
felt like I needed some sort of a purpose, long-term purpose in life, and that just killed me. And then now I'm trying to go back to I just gotta be obsessed about whatever is in front of me. Right now, I feel more strongly than ever. That's my life philosophy is rather than hitting this 5-year mark or coming up with some sort of a long-term purpose, I just gotta give it all to whatever is in front of me right now. For example, this week last week I started planning out the next quarter curriculum,
Yeah.
and every quarter I come up with completely new thing. Like when I sit down, like this week, I'm starting to figure out, okay, well, like I ask people to do this myth truth thing. What are the myths they're coming to me with? Why don't they get it? And it's because they actually don't even realize. Because I think most people don't even realize that the myth they believe in because they're so in that field that they're in, is not actually the myth that everyone good example. I think a lot of people that teach music think that they need to teach like how to read music and like everything like about music, but actually people who want to learn music, they just want to learn how to play an instrument. Do
Yeah.
you understand what
Or
I
a
mean? Or they
song or a
or
particular
some yeah,
song,
exactly. And or another thing is right now there's a myth that Here's a new myth truth that I came up with that I'm gonna turn into a carousel. People think that if you're really good in something, that you can teach it. If I'm really good in design, I can teach design. If I'm good in marketing, I can teach marketing. But the thing is, everybody's good in driving, but they suck when they try to teach other people. They teach their daughter how to drive or something like that. They suck at it. It's because knowing how to do something is very different from teaching how to do that thing. And that's like I think, myth that everybody's, I'll just go create an online course doing that, right? No,
Well,
but when you actually teach that, it's like a completely different story, right? You actually have to learn how to teach that, which is
well,
what I'm
that's
going through right now. Yeah.
oh, yeah. I think that's one of the biggest problems in higher education right now is because you can become, let's say you're an accountant, you could get
Hmm.
hired to teach accounting at the college,
Yeah.
but you're not a teacher.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of professors, people will complain, this is the worst professor I ever had, or
Yeah.
this is the best professor I ever had. And many of the ones that don't do well as imparting that knowledge are, they don't know how to be teachers. They only know how to do their
Because
thing.
they can't put themselves in
They're
the shoe
trained.
of the beginner.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
they're just like, why can't you do? Why don't you get it? Why aren't you getting it?
Or
Like,
they have their own way. They're just like, this is the way I'm going to tell you. Or they're telling instead of teaching. There's a difference
yeah, that's
between
true.
telling and teaching.
That too. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's just talk about what you think are the best lessons that you've learned over time in your life. What would you say are the
Like
your
by
biggest
far the
lessons?
biggest is that looking at my life, like I could have never planned for it. So just instead of keep trying to control the next 5 years of life or trying to have a vision for whatever it is, I really truly believe that, for example, this conversation, if I'm just putting 100% into this conversation as turn this into the best conversation I can possibly have, somebody might watch it and that might lead to an opportunity somewhere down the line. Or
That's
like, you
right.
just never know these serendipity things that happens in life
That,
that
yeah.
whatever like you can go to a grocery store and just treat that person with kindness and just be really like present with that moment. And that person might turn out to be nephew of somebody who can be your best client. You
Mhm.
just never really know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest lesson I think for me in my life is that just what if you're gonna do something, just really do it.
Just really do it. Just be there, be in it all the way.
Yeah. And don't worry about if I'm going on IG live, don't look at the number of people that are in it or like how many people like it. Just really be present in that conversation.
Give all
Or
of yourself in
exactly.
everything. When you're giving, give all of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. What are your biggest blessings?
I guess I've always felt this like blessing you meaning like the circumstances that happen or just
Or things you're grateful for? Whatever it means to you.
I'm so grateful that my mom forced me to learn so many like so what Korean parents like my mom never spent any money buying me anything, but they went over and beyond spending money to send me to different classes. So when I
Mm.
was young, I did taekwondo, I did a calligraphy class, I went to swimming class, I did art, I did piano, violin, guitar. There are just so many little things that she sent me to, even though I hated it when I was young. But I think what I learned there is I learned how to learn because learning so many different things, what it taught me is that when you learn anything new, there's some similarities to it, whether you're learning how to snowboard or you're learning how to design or play guitar. There's some similarities where, in the beginning, you just gotta memorize something and you just gotta repeat it over and over. And then there's a point where it clicks and I get it now. And
Mhm.
then you hit that threshold. And once you hit that, you figure out there's a whole new world out there. And then so there's, I think, some commonality. And throughout high school, throughout college, and even after, like, when I learned design, when I was in that agency, I just picked up things really quickly. Whatever it is, I just learned everything really quickly,
Yeah.
and I felt a little bit guilty at
Mm.
times because whenever I'm in a class, I see everyone else is struggling, and then everything just came really easy to me, and I even felt like when I hear a Tony Robbins story and I hear all this, like, my client who was an addict, like rock bottom moment. I never had that rock bottom moment, right? Like I feel like everything in my life just came so easily. And I feel a little bit entitled in that sense. Like I never really struggled. And sometimes I feel a little bit guilty for that, but also super grateful that
That's an interesting thing because there are so many people that share stories like that. And then is it a societal thing that we're being pressured to feel guilty if we don't have some kind of major tragedy in our lives?
maybe because like when you watch every movie, right? Every movie has that rock bottom moment. And I almost glorify it in my head. I'm like, I wish I became homeless so that I have,
They're gonna have the
like,
comeback story.
yeah, exactly. But I've never had that. I never really had, like, I always had the safety of worst case scenario. I can go back home and live with my parents.
Yep.
You know what I
And
mean?
meanwhile, the homeless guy is like, "Well, this guy has it all. I wish I
Yeah,
had his life."
yeah, something like that.
Yes.
Exactly.
All right. Last question. What's the most important thing? First thing that comes to your mind.
Other than being present, it's for me, it's the relationship that you build with people, like human to human.
Mm,
I used to so I'm a very I'm super introverted. I'm not really social and things like that. So I always dismiss that. But it's the thing. Remember, I told you I would cut people out of my life
yeah.
because I felt like I was not empathetic to those human relationships. I
Yeah.
was always more focused on things more than
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
But more and more as I get older, I regret that. And I'm trying my best to go back and heal old wounds and fix relationships and like what I did with my parents.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I took it for granted when I was young because I always had like friends around. And when you're young, you're living in the dorms and like just always having people around. I guess I took it for granted. But now when I see people that are still close friends with their childhood friends, or when I go somewhere and they have a huge family gathering or they're really close and stuff like that, I feel a little bit jealous. And I'm like,
Yeah.
a little bit envious of that. Yeah.
But you can nurture relationships at any stage of your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess I regret and I wish I had started earlier, but I know it's not too late. Like
No.
even now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, son. I am really grateful for your time and all of your energy today. And it's been so nice talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't think I've ever shared this much detail of my life with anyone.
Well, that's good because people are going to be interested to hear it. All right. Thanks again, son.
Thanks, Mitzi.
Thank you.
Cheers.